Hello, this is Dr. Jay Davidson from drjdavidson.com. Thank you for joining me on the Mitochondrial Summit. My guest is Dr. Shay, and we're going to be exploring the ion panel, functional testing for the mitochondria. But before we do, a little bit about Dr. Shay. Dr. Shay, DC, helps prevent and reverse burnout for entrepreneurs and mompreneurs who have behavioral and food addictions. He's the creator of the 10 Pillars of Health framework and the secular framework for reversing addiction known as Tame the Beast. These unique frameworks combine the best of lifestyle medicine, custom nutrition, and functional testing to truly individualize functional medicine to optimize performance and prevent burnout. Dr. Shay, welcome to the Mitochondria Summit.
Thanks so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, I have to say, just reading the bio, I'm like, reversing addiction, behavioral, food, entrepreneur, mompreneur. Can you give me a little background on that? I don't know if I've interviewed anybody on addiction specialists.
Yeah, there's hardly anyone who's focused not just on entrepreneurs, but a subspecialty of entrepreneurs who have behavioral addictions. And that's my primary focus. And the background is that I grew up being raised by a single mom. My father was there peripherally. He paid child support, saw him every other weekend, but really I was raised by my mom. And my mom was an entrepreneur with her clinical practice as a psychiatrist. And I watched her go through a lot of burnout and be in a lot of physical pain and just not have the tools that we have with functional medicine. And as a result, I was in, when you have a parent and an entrepreneur and they're under a lot of stress and pressure raising 4 kids and all these other things, a lot of stuff gets pushed to the side and for coping. And as a result, it was a very, very stressful time growing up. And I developed 2 addictions, one to video games, one to sugar, in order to cope with the fallout of the divorce, tremendous stress at school. I had eating disorder. I had severe insomnia. I had terrible digestive problems. I had chronic pain. I had such bad insomnia, it actually stunted my growth from age 6 to age 18. And it was a really super difficult time. And I realized that the audience that I want to serve the most are the people who are pushing the society forward, with a special emphasis on those who struggle with addictions. By mean push society forward, I'm talking about entrepreneurs. It's like the entrepreneurs are the people that are taking the risks, trying out new things. They're frequently they're usually the villain in almost 90% of all sitcoms and movies. Like, it's the evil businessman, which is like not my experience with most entrepreneurs. But they're frequently maligned, but they're the ones that are actually pushing everything forward. And it's a stressful job. And I think that people become entrepreneurs because they want more freedom. And that comes directly from Dan Sullivan. And, we want more freedom of time, more freedom of money, more freedom of relationship, and more freedom of purpose. And that's what I saw my mother striving to do. And that's what I see other entrepreneurs doing. And the irony is that frequently the 5th freedom, what I call health freedom, that's the one that's sacrificed in the name of those other 4 freedoms. And it's even a deeper irony, because if you sacrifice enough health freedom to attain those 4 freedoms, time, money, relationship, and purpose, again, from Dan Sullivan, if you sacrifice enough health freedom, even if you achieve those 4 other freedoms, you can't enjoy those 4 freedoms because now you've lost your health freedom. And that's what we call burnout. And the burnout is, you can get burnout on the way to those freedoms, and you can have burnout after you've achieved said freedoms. And it's really tragic because you work your whole life, and there's a lot of people in the blast radius of the burnout, whether it's your children, whether it's your friends, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your friend, anyone else. People are in the blast radius of burnout, and it affects so many people around you, especially children, which is what I experienced. So that's why I'm really motivated to help people, particularly entrepreneurs and mompreneurs, because I've been on the wrong end of that experience. And I don't want that to happen to other people. And so that's why I focused on functional medicine for this particular crowd. And I like the ion panel specifically because it is the broadest test I have ever seen that checks the mitochondria. And if you ever wanted one thing to land on, physiologically, biochemically, anatomically, for burnout, it's the mitochondria. Like that is, and so a lot of people say, well, it's the adrenals. Well, the adrenals and the mitochondria are kind of in a dance. It's the adrenal thyroid system help turn on or off the mitochondria in the cells. But ultimately, energy is generated in the cell. And the adrenal system is absolutely a part of it. But the mitochondria is a massive portion of it, not just for preventing burnout, but also to achieve that optimal aspirational, which is to be in high performance, have higher creativity, better decision making, all the things that entrepreneurs need, not just to prevent burnout, but to actually build their business in a meaningful and scalable way. So the adrenals is a whole other side, but the mitochondria, that's really kind of where things ultimately land on, and also where the aspirational side of it is to really go forward in one's business and life.
I'm really excited to get into the ion panel, and I know you've got some slides put together to actually demonstrate or kind of, better visibility for the listener of the summit, which I'm super excited about. Little difference of interviews. So we'll have to get some feedback from y'all and see what you think.
For sure.
But really, side question before we dive into that panel, thinking about addiction. I mean, just in general, is there any statistics of how many people have some form of addiction? And I'm thinking phone addiction. I would say I have a learning addiction, like I just want to consume content. You talked about sugar addiction, which seems to be massive. There's alcohol, gambling,
So addiction is a loaded word. Addiction is a very culturally sensitive word, particularly when you conjure the word addiction to one's mind. It's someone shivering in the corner, vomiting into a bucket with either a needle in their arm or a bottle in their hand. And that is simply a small but very publicized minority of addicts. And the better way to understand addiction is actually the term cannibalism. And that's not my term. That comes from Wainwright and Pognanovich, who wrote the book, It's Not Okay to Be a Cannibal. It's a brilliant book. Basically, to identify the behavior of an addict, mere consumption of alcohol or drugs or the phone or learning or whatever it is, does not an addict make. Is there continued destructive, cannibalistic behavior? Are you consuming your life, the lives of those around you, and your environment around you, while still using the vice? And if you take that definition versus the shivering in the corner, vomiting into a bucket image of addiction, then suddenly the lens opens up into, wow, am I doing something that is destructive? The conversation on addiction, to be really frank, is a good 1 hour separate podcast. And I've done lots and lots of those and been on multiple addiction summits, and people can just put my name into podcasts on iTunes. They can put my name, summit. They will find plenty of addiction summits on it. But in super briefly, most people, in my experience, are engaging in at least one behavior that they know is causing damage despite doing the behavior and over, and despite the signs. And so people say, watch too much, like just touch screens, for example. The number one casualty of screen time is sleep. Number one. And that was certainly my experience and the experience of other people I've worked with. And if you just look at one's behaviors, the go-to thing that they do, ask yourself, what am I sacrificing to do this thing? And is that a good trade-off? And just be honest with oneself. And if you just have that small conversation with yourself, you can then see the window into one's addiction, in air quotes, addiction, and then start to reverse the process there. I think more people are addicted to something than any statistic is truly measured. To be just blunt about it. Most people, I think, are addicted to something. It's just that culturally, societal, like workaholism is celebrated in the States, but spit on in other countries. Smoking is fine in France, but you're called a walking cancer stick in other parts of the world. Video games is the national sport in South Korea. That's true. Just like chess is considered, an elite sport in Russia and other places, video games in South Korea. But in other parts of the world, it's like, what are you doing? So A lot of addictions are culturally defined. And like I said, this is if you want to peek open that Pandora's box, Jay, like we're gonna get derailed from the ion panel real quick.
Yeah. We'll catch you on another interview
Sure.
or summit to dive into that.
And just to tie it actually to the ion panel, if people have weak mitochondria, their frontal lobes don't work properly. Therefore, their ability to control addictive behavior is summarily reduced. And there's and then also you can look at the dopamine pathways, tyrosine levels, epinephrine, neurotransmitters. Like we can easily tie this into addiction also as we go through. I can just throw in little snippets, but absolutely, if someone's struggling with addiction, I'd be running the ion panel for sure. But there's a multiple behavioral, societal issues tacked on top of it.
Well said. Okay, so let's dive into the ion panel. Is it primarily just for mitochondria, or are you gleaming a lot of other insight as a practitioner?
Oh, you can have so much fun with the mitochondria.
Okay.
I mean, with the ion panel. Like there's one master test to run. It would be the ion panel, and because you'll see it touches on so many things. And now what the ion panel does not do, it doesn't measure thyroid hormones directly, though you can get an add-on through Genova to add thyroid hormones to it. It doesn't measure cortisol levels directly, but the phenylmandelate marker shares with you what's going on, at the medulla level. Like it's with you get amino acid levels, and there's certain amino acids that you can key into multiple parts of the physiology. So, and there's a microbiome portion. It's not the same as a stool test, but you can get measurements of overgrowth, fungal infections, and other issues with the gut. But it's not the same as, say, a GI-FX or a GI map or whatever. But you can touch on almost every aspect of functional medicine with the ion panel.
And is it a blood test, saliva, urine?
It's a mixture of of blood and urine. And it's not saliva, it's not cheek swab, it's not stool, it's just blood and urine. Now, the ion panel, some people don't like needles. But so you can approximate the ion panel loosely with getting an organics comprehensive profile through urine, and then getting the blood spot test for amino acids and fatty acids from Genova. And you get most of it, plus or minus, not the whole thing, but you get a good approximation for people who are patients who are scared of needles.
Okay. So, but essentially it's the blood work and urine, and then you're getting the ion panel. Is there, what's the ion panel stand for? Is there like an acronym for that?
The ion panel, I'm actually blanking on that. How ironic, but I've never seen it ever spelled out. That's why I'm searching my brain. I was like, I've never actually seen it spelled out as an acronym. I'm sure there's an acronym somewhere, but I've never seen it.
Probably a long scientific one, and they just abbreviated.
It was developed in the 70s by Dr. Lord, and he was the one who cognized this whole thing as well as the GI effects. And I can ask him.
Okay, cool. Well, so how do we interpret mitochondria through it? And I guess maybe even backing up a second, why is it important to test mitochondria?
So when we look at the mitochondria, let's contextualize the mitochondria first, because then it'll make sense much more easily. So the mitochondria make up about 10% of your body weight, and they are the electricity factories of the cell. I mean, I'm sure many people have gone through this summit. They've heard this phrase before. The way that I simplify it is that your cell is a minor city, and if the electricity goes out in the city, you can survive on batteries and flashlights and candles for a couple days before it turns into Mad Max, right? So that's where the adrenal system comes in as the emergency to generate, inefficient amounts of electricity when stuff goes wrong. But you need the electricity in the city to run everything, and that is everything. It's healing, it's getting rid of toxins, it's the immune system, it's brain function, it's pushing things out of the cell, bringing things in. It's all that requires energy and ATP. And mitochondria are a very fragile yet very efficient method of generating high concentrations of ATP, electricity, with no smoke, no exhaust. Whereas the adrenal system, when your mitochondria isn't working, you start generating energy inefficiently, and you create lactic acid, which is what I call smoke, like candle smoke. And you get enough of that buildup, you get muscle pains and all sorts of problems. So when you look at all the reasons why the mitochondria can be damaged, you look at lifestyle. All right. So what we're looking at here is called the 10 pillars of health. This is my model, my clinical framework I work with clients on. And I developed it based off the chiropractic triangle of health, which you can see it buried: physical, biochemical, mental, emotional. But that model was developed in the late 1800s, and things got more complicated since then. So it's actually 10 pillars. So the 10 pillars are brain and hormone system. If your brain is imbalanced or your hormones are off, your mitochondria will suffer. So the second pillar is bowel and digestion, where you need to poop. You need to get rid of the toxins in your body. How long would you stay in a house with a toilet that didn't flush? And the answer is not very long. It would back up. And you're a detox expert. You know this better than anybody. So it's like bowel and digestion. So we're looking at, can you digest your food? I mean, it's a great thing to put in expensive supplements in your body, but can you actually absorb them? And then can you actually use them? And that's also where the mitochondria come into play. If you don't have the right digestion and egress of toxins, your mitochondria will suffer. Third pillar is body, which includes genetics, untreated injuries, traumatic brain injuries, bad dental work, spinal problems, misaligned spine, chronic pain. So that's the physical body. Burst exercise and movement. This is the right type of exercise, not overdoing it like marathoning. I have an article on my blog, which is diplomatically entitled "Why Marathoners Look Like Cancer Patients." Fifth is biotoxins and all that is, everything toxic. Sixth pillar is nutrients and all of nutrition. Seventh is breakfast, routines, and habits. My first ebook was on breakfast and routines. Eighth pillar is bothers, which is for stress, whether it's financial stress, societal stress, marital stress, etc. Bugs is hidden infections, mold, gut infections, whatever, your relationship with all things microscopic that are alive. 10th pillar is sleep, bedtime. So those are the 10 pillars of health. And if you have poor sleep, your mitochondria are going to get off. If you've got a hidden infection or mold, certainly will screw up your mitochondria. Stress will affect your mitochondria. Terrible routines will screw it up. Some of the sickest people I've ever worked with were night shift nurses. You know, they got their 8 hours of sleep, but they got it over here, then over here, then over here, then over here. It just totally screws them up. Poor nutrition will affect the mitochondria. Toxins will, of course, affect it. Wearing out your body or not moving it enough will affect mitochondria. Genetic issues show up with mitochondria, whether it's, you know, MN-SOD gene or the GPX1 gene or all these other inflammatory genes, and so on and so forth. And then to contextualize where the mitochondria fit in with functional medicine, you've got, this is a cycle that I learned from Dr. Kalish, so I added my 10 pillars over here. You have bad circumstances or choices interpreted through your genetics lead to one of the four, a combination of four adaptive responses. People have inflammation, blood sugar dysregulation, tissue breakdown, and free radicals. Chronic adaptation interpreted through their genetics equals damage to one of the three major systems: liver detox, gut, GI, neuroendocrine hormone system. Breakdown of these three systems interpreted through your genetics leads to symptoms: fatigue, low mood, burnout, etc. Then people cope in any number of ways, which then leads to more adaptation, which then leads to more damage, which then leads to more symptoms, and round it goes. This is the cycle of burnout. This is what I saw with my mom. This is what I see with so many entrepreneurs that I work with. And the way to contextualize the mitochondria and all of functional medicine is that lifestyle correction is over here in the top left. How to eat, how to exercise, how to poop, how to move, how to get the rhythm in your life, how to like habits, routines, rhythmicity, regularity, dealing with stress, getting rid of the mold, improving your sleep hygiene. But use functional testing, whether it's mitochondrial, adrenal, gut, heavy metal, whatever. All of that lives over here on the right side, where we test for what adaptive responses you're going through and what organ systems have been damaged. And then using functional testing, we can then customize nutrition and diet to then reverse the whole process in conjunction with and on the platform of changing your lifestyle. No one here should ever believe, ever, that just running an ion panel or any functional test, and here's your magic supplement program, it's going to solve all your problems. That is nonsense. You need to have the lifestyle coaching involved as well, because that is the foundation of being able to use the nutrition and to stop this whole process in the first place. So that's
Sounds
how
like personal responsibility is
absolutely. And the real functional medicine coach walks you through this entire cycle in detail and in order of priority. So the ion panel fits in because it tests so many things. So it's got Genova's Organics Comprehensive Profile, which checks, are your mitochondria making energy? How are your neurotransmitter metabolites doing? Like, are you actually using the neurotransmitters? It has brain inflammation markers, free radical markers, liver pathway function, microbiome markers like yeast. It checks for your fatty acid balance. Now, fatty acids, people can have too much omega-6 or too much omega-3, and that's the background milieu of your entire metabolism. That's how your fatty acids are doing. So this is super important. Amino acid balance, 5 key heavy metals, 6 key minerals, some key nutrients, particularly fat-soluble nutrients, and the inflammation marker homocysteine. So that is what the ion panel tests for, and it's a lot. Effectively, it's like 7 major tests in one thing.
Okay.
So the history is that it was developed originally by Dr. Lord. And so Dr. Lord was a founder, was a part of Metametrics Labs. And what happened is that he originally used this as a screen for genetic malfunctions based on functional markers. So basically, if someone had inborn genetic error of metabolism, if they were 2x higher than the upper limit of the 5th quintile, and I'm using a lot of jargon here, basically, if your marker was, there's a bell curve that people have of these nutrient markers. The middle bit is the 3rd quintile, over a little bit is the 2nd, down to the bottom is the 1st, over to this side is the 4th, and this is the 5th quintile. So the edges here represent 95% of the whole population. Anything below the 1st quintile is the bottom 2.5% of the population. Anything above the 5th quintile is the upper 97.5%. So you have then so let's say like one marker's of the 95th percentile, the top edge of it, the upper limit is like 100. But if someone has this level of 200, they are so far outside that standard deviation that it has to be, or most likely is, a genetic error of metabolism. So that's why he developed it. And a reason I like the ion panel is that Dr. Lord calibrated the machines themselves, himself. And the other organic acid tests, like the Nutravel and other organic acid testing, that was all knockoff of his work. I would rather use the tests that the originator made, hand-dialed, using the machines that he hand-tuned, than other ones.
When you mention organic acid testing, so does the ion panel essentially include an organic acids test plus other things?
It is. It includes the Organics Comprehensive Profile, okay, which is the core. And then, so you have the Organics Comprehensive Profile, which is Dr. Lord's Organic Acids Profile. It's called Organics with an X. But then the ion panel is tacking on top of it fatty acids, amino acids, heavy metals, minerals, nutrients, and inflammation marker.
Got it.
That's
okay.
what the ion panel is. It's a mitochondria plus. Well, plus test.
Okay.
So why the ion panel over the Nutravel? So this is just Genova. It's the same company because Genova bought out Metametrics, but they kept the separate things that Metametrics already made that they had copied off of, called the Nutravel. So they have both tests. So the reason why I like the ion panel, aside from those other reasons, is that it shows the quintiles very evenly and cleanly, as you can see right here. It shows the lower edge of the 5th quintile right here. So the range is 56 to 987. So that's the 56 over here for the very lowest edge of the 1st quintile. Top edge is 987, but you get to see right here the cutoff between the 4th and the 5th quintile is 601. And I know this is really nerdy, but the more people get into this interpretation, the more important this is. And you can see down here in Nutravel, they don't give that. And by the way, the numbers are different because they use different units here, like microgram per, and this is like nanomole per mole. have to go look up what the units are, but these different units here, that's why these numbers are different.
Okay.
But this is way easier to interpret because in some of these markers, the difference between quintiles is actually the key. The difference between, like, is it 2 quintiles higher or lower, 3, 4? That is critical, and that's really hard to read off of the NutriValves. All right? There are also different machines that were not dialed by Dr. Lord. So that's to give some clarity, because people will ask, well, can't I just do NutriValve? Here's why. And I have to credit where credit is due. I'm very grateful to Dr. Kalish. He's the one who taught me how to interpret this, and I must give him credit for this. The most important thing about doing any of these organic acids profiles, whether it's an organics or the ion panel, is you must look at the creatinine level. No one teaches this except for Dr. Kalish and Dr. Lord. So if the creatinine level it's basically a marker in which they calibrate, how well your kidney function is doing. So if your creatinine, the normal range should be between 50 and 350. But if your creatinine is under 50, that means that the markers are measured as too high. It's a denominator issue. So if it's under 50, you actually have to take this marker and move it up a quintile. This marker, move it up a quintile. This marker of calcium goes actually up into beyond the 5th quintile. If it's over 350, the reverse happens. You drop this into low, drop this into low, drop the calcium down into the 4th quintile. That is super important because what you're looking for in these panels is patterns of high and low. But if it's artificially elevated or artificially depressed, you have to know that. Otherwise, you get a wrong interpretation.
So essentially with low creatinine, all the levels are going to be lower than they actually are.
All the levels are reported higher than they actually are. So you got to drop them down. You gotta drop them down one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So high creatinine is then when they're artificially low?
Yes.
Okay.
Because
got it.
Creatinine is on the denominator. Yep. So when you have a high number in the denominator, think that the final number, whatever you're dividing it by, appears lower than it actually is. If you have a really small denominator, you're dividing it by a really tiny number. The numerator becomes ultimately the final result becomes larger. So you got to reduce it down.
Okay.
I know it could seem confusing, but just people who are listening, just go over this conversation a couple times and you'll get it. But it is the most important number to first look at. So then there's also some normal elevated numbers that are just circumstantial. So if someone's on a ketogenic diet, like this number is from me, the beta-hydroxybutyrate as 29 when the upper limit is 9.9. So like, oh, whoa, isn't that a genetic error of metabolism? No, that's mean I'm in massive amounts of ketosis because of my diet. So some markers are super high because of circumstantial reasons that are not related to genetic errors of metabolism. Also, if you're looking at the 5-HIAA marker, you're looking at, are they on antidepressants? Are they on L-tryptophan? Are they on really high doses of St. John's wort? If they're on too much coconut oil, their lauric acid, like this is from a client of mine, their lauric acid is like basically double. They're just pounding the coconut oil, okay? So there's some things that are circumstantially high. Then we've got the amino acids. And so now what we're doing is we're going into the meat of the mitochondria, the ion panel itself. So it starts with the amino acids. Now when you look at these numbers of the amino acids, you ask yourself, what is individually low? What is globally low? Is like a pattern. You can also say globally high, and what is markedly high. But patterns in general are more important than individual markers. So the question is, what is low and what is high? Now, my measure of what is within the normal range that we don't worry about, that is not the 3rd quintile. It is actually the upper half of the 2nd quintile, all the way including the 3rd quintile, including the bottom half of the 4th quintile. It's that middle bit that I determine as, you know what, that's within the normal range of so many people. I'm looking at stuff outside that. And also it prevents, some practitioners, all they treat is the test and not the person. You know, like just because something can be outside the third quintile doesn't mean the client or patient is doomed. Not at all. Have a range, look for patterns, don't perseverate over specifics.
So how do amino acids represent mitochondrial function?
So you need amino acids to build mitochondria, number one. If people have what's called mitochondrial retraction, which was a buzzword I was going to use later on when we're getting to the organic acids portion. But there's literature out there now called mitochondrial retraction, where your mitochondria actually are broken. Like it's not that they need to be rebuilt. So you need amino acids to build them. Amino acids also form major constituents of what's called the Krebs cycle. I mean, you can look, this is biochemistry 101, where you feed amino acids in either directly or they convert into the other amino acid that goes into it. Amino acids are a part of the entire mitochondrial construct, the actual infrastructure, but also part of the cycle of making energy in the first place. So they're absolutely critical. And what we're looking at with these amino acids, you'll notice it's double-tailed. You see how it's like yellow, red on either side?
Yep.
Okay. If they're high, if amino acids are high, let's look at, this is my amino acids. This is from a test I did earlier this year. Branch chain amino acids, they're in the upper half of the fourth quintile and one is in the upper half of the fifth quintile. What does this mean? If they're high amino acid, this is a blood test, by the way. This means they're floating around their blood and they're not getting into the cells. That means that you are not, or in this case me, I am not utilizing the amino acids that are readily available. That's usually a B vitamin problem. That if you have a lot of amino acids, they're just not being used. So your metabolism to use them is not working properly. It's usually B vitamins. If they're low, like here phenylalanine, that means you're deficient in phenylalanine. That's point and click. Add phenylalanine. If they're high, it's almost always a utilization problem and you need B vitamins. That's pretty much how you want to, because this is a general discussion of how to interpret an ion panel, not every single marker in detail. But that's how you interpret amino acids. This is the second page of it. And you'll see here my tyrosine level is really low. So this is point and click. I add tyrosine to my diet. I've got asparagine that's low. So I'd be adding foods that contain that. There's some ratios here on the bottom which are interesting, but ultimately like look for the patterns and focus there. If it's high, utilization. If it's low, gross deficiency. And then there's some people that cluster. Like I have someone who's got a cluster of all basically first quintile and lower urea cycle. So that means they've got a real problem in their liver. So that's what I mean by looking for a cluster.
So from your test from the first and second page, is there any general interpretation that you have for your
mine is pretty straightforward because there's not really patterns necessarily. There's maybe a micro pattern with like the isoleucine, valine, and so on. But really, almost everything is within that second to fourth plus or minus range. You see that? So I'm now looking at individual markers. If everything is kind of in general within that normal range, that's when you look at really specific markers. And I look at tyrosine and phenylalanine that really stick out, and I'm not using the tryptophan properly. That's pretty much it. And you can look at asparagine, but these are the most important functionally.
Okay, but I guess from interpretation for the mitochondria, I mean, just you basically need more amino acids to help feed the mitochondria, or can you get kind of an equivalency like, oh, my mitochondria's function at 70% based on these amino acids?
Okay, so that to actually look at the true health of the mitochondria itself, that's later on in the organic acids portion. If we want, we can skip to that and then come back to these, because I'm just going through the way the ion panel is presented in order in which it's presented. Okay.
Yeah. Why don't you keep cruising and we can get to that part.
Yeah, because if you really just want a core mitochondria test, it's the organics comprehensive profile. The ion panel is the mitochondria plus. It's all these other things that affect the mitochondria and kind of its surrounding environment. So this is part of the environment. So then we've got the next part of the ion panel, which is homocysteine, which looks for inflammation. So if you have inflammation, you can damage your mitochondria. It's kind of straightforward. Inflammation also affects other parts of your body, affects your ability, it binds up the liver, affects other metabolism, which would then otherwise free up nutrients, or really if the liver is dealing with inflammation, it's a harder time dealing with toxic elements and toxic stuff, which then gum up the mitochondria. So this is again my test. My inflammatory marker is on the higher side than what I'm comfortable with. I want that lower. So that tells me that I have some inflammation going on, which is affecting my mitochondria, amongst other things. And I need to address that nutritionally in terms and lifestyle. Then we've got minerals and heavy metals. So as you can see here, I've got first quintile potassium and magnesium, which total shocker to me. But you'll see how significant this is later. Like if you want one mineral, aside from say maybe zinc, that is the most important to the mitochondria, it's magnesium. If you're deficient in magnesium, super important. So for these, it's point and click. I need to add more potassium. I need to add more magnesium. And if I add more magnesium, it should lower some of these levels of calcium. But there's a note here that blood level calcium has so many things that intersect on it that this marker is more about membrane permeability than actual nutritional status. So that I would say leave the calcium marker for much more advanced conversation because it's a bit too complex for the time we've got. But
would you say the similar thing with magnesium? Only 1% really is in like the red blood cell and serum.
So the magnesium marker, the magnesium is a much more useful marker. It's not as complex a marker as the calcium is. And I would use this magnesium marker, but there's other magnesium indicators also throughout the tests as well to indicate if there's a magnesium need. But I'm looking here and point and click, adding more potassium and magnesium into my diet. Then you got the heavy metals. 5 key ones. Of course, there's plenty more. Aluminum, arsenic, cadmium, lead, mercury. This is blood level. Of course, there's different ways to measure heavy metals. There's several ways to do it. This is one of them, and it's useful to know. And this is an example of a pre and post, not of me, but of someone I was working with, how in 1 year of not detoxing him, I didn't put him through a mercury detox, an arsenic detox, or an aluminum detox. What I did is I worked on his mitochondria through the ion panel, and you saw that aluminum, arsenic, and mercury all dropped by approximately 50%. This was not a detox I did with him. It was a mitochondrial support, which then enabled his liver pathways and everything else to address detox. There's plenty of wonderful ways to detox the body. You're an expert in this, you know this, that I'm showing that if you can help the mitochondria, your detox capacity will just go up automatically. Not and maybe as fully as it might need, depending on the individual situation, but you will help the detox regardless if you support the mitochondria. In fact, me personally, I make sure someone's mitochondria and liver pathways are working first before jumping into a detox. Like I see so many people getting off the shelf detoxes or whatever. They need to support their mitochondria and gut and adrenals first. Next, we've got fat-soluble vitamins, lipid peroxidase, 8-hydroxy-deoxyguanosine, which is a DNA marker, and then vitamin D. So this is basically dealing with fat-soluble issues here, and plus free radical damage to DNA. So if this is looking at CoQ10, the tocopherols, vitamin A, beta-carotene. If these are problematic, then what happens is your lipids can start to go rancid. And whether they're high in if they're high in the blood, it means you're not utilizing them. And if they're low in the blood, it's like the amino acids. If they're low, it's a deficiency. If they're high, you're not using them correctly. They're not getting into the cells. And that can cause problems over here. I would like my lipid peroxidase to be lower, for sure. And then we'll see later on, the level of your levels of fat can be indicated in this test as well. So if the lipid peroxidases are normal, but your total fat based on your fatty acid profile is low, that means that what little fats you do have, they're all oxidizing, but because there's so little fat, but they're oxidizing so much, the peroxide level appears normal, but it's not normal, because if you had a normal amount of fat in your blood, you would be moving the peroxide marker further to the right and it'd be high. So there's a ratio. That's why you need all these quintiles to be able to judge in terms of ratios. Are you over oxidizing even if your peroxides appear to be within the normal range based on the amount of fat you have. Then you've got another marker here for free radical damage, and then you've got a vitamin D marker. So as you can see, the ion panel also functions as a global kind of nutrient test. Like, where are you on your micronutrients?
Okay.
Then next we got fatty acids. So fatty acids, a lot of people get overwhelmed and confused by fatty acids. I'm going to try to simplify this as best as possible. So fatty acids are high they can be high based on diet, or they can be high based off of an enzyme blockade. So for example, this is my fatty acid profile. So I have very low ALA. Very low ALA is I'm not getting enough food in my diet that has enough ALA in it, like flax oil, other things out there have ALA in it. But then you see the jump, like the pathway it goes ALA, 2 other steps, then EPA, DPA, and DHA. So how did it go from first quintile to fourth, third, and fourth quintile? The answer is I took a lot of fish oil. So I had low ALA, but I have higher downstream. How does that work? The answer is diet. I spiked it on the far end. Then we go down and have the reverse problem. My LA is through the roof. It's like 5th quintile, but the very next step, which is mediated by delta-6 desaturase, which is an enzyme that requires B vitamins, zinc, magnesium, and vitamin C, I go from 5th quintile to 1st quintile. That is statistically almost impossible unless you have a massive enzyme blockade. I can't convert this. So what was one of the key needs, cofactors for delta-6 desaturase? Magnesium. 1st quintile magnesium. I'm deficient in magnesium, which is showing up as an enzyme blockade here, because that enzyme's not working properly. So okay. I'm getting too much LA in my diet, or I'm getting normal amounts, but it's building up because the enzyme isn't there to let it pass through the GLA and so forth. So that's where looking at the quintiles is really important. To understand how to improve enzymes of fatty acids is really straightforward. Almost all the enzymes have basically all the same things. There's some variations in the B vitamins, but they all need magnesium, they all need vitamin C, they all need zinc, and they need B vitamins. So if you just do lots of that, that's why people's skin improves when you give them vitamin C. It's because it's helping with their fatty acid metabolism. Mead is a marker of long-term essential fatty acid deficiency. So if this was high, that would show long-term essential fatty acid deficiency, because you can, a lot of times some clients and patients, what they'll do is that right before they retest, they'll suddenly spike all their supplements with what they should have been taking and add extra just to make their tests look good. So they actually have nice essential fatty acids up here. But if you look over here at Mead, you'll see if they've actually been taking them over the 6 months you told them to or not. There's some other fatty acids, but the real important ones are the omega-3s and omega-6s. This is a chart that I put together that goes through the whole pathway. So all I had to do was put in the quintiles in the red. That's why I like the ion panel, not the Nutrivel. And you can see clear as day, like the linoleic goes from 5th to 1st. Blockade, right here, delta-6 desaturase. What are the things I need? B vitamins, magnesium, zinc, vitamin C, some insulin, according to the literature. Go down through here, and I can just list all the enzymes, and I can see the transitions just based on the quintiles. And that's how you quickly and accurately interpret a fatty acid test.
How many of these tests do you need to know that this is accurate? I mean, are you running multiple and kind of looking at patterns, or you run one and you got to take action based on that?
I'll show you right here, the low, I didn't include it, but here's an example of someone that had low fat across their whole fatty acid profile. You can see how it's just like in the lower half of the 2nd quintile and lower. And then when I ran his stool test over here to the left, you see he's got all this fat in his stool he's not absorbing. So then I didn't include the follow-up ion panel, but I changed his diet and I improved his fat absorption. and it pulled out almost every single one out of the low and normalized. Just basically move. What you need to look at is that for every 6 months you do a legit high strength protocol with someone, you can expect to see a quintile improvement. One quintile improvement. That's what you should expect over a 6 month period, because quintiles are actually a significant jump. That's a whole standard deviation change. So when I did his retest 6 months later, it had shifted over approximately 1 quintile. Some jumped a little bit more, some a little bit less, but it was all on average 1 quintile. So that's, and in terms of statistically, do we know these quintiles are active in general? Dr. Lord did that research when he ran the test multiple times, and saw, was there any variation over the course of a month? Okay. And there's a couple markers that did vary wildly from test to test. And that had to do, the big one was actually pyroglutamate, but that varied based off a woman's menstrual cycle. It didn't vary amongst, all with over the month, it all stayed within 1 standard deviation. It didn't jump up 2, 3, it all stayed, except a couple markers. And the big one was pyroglutamate, and only in women, which tracked their menstrual cycle.
Okay.
So then we have the organic acids test. And so markers 1 through 21 is the function of the mitochondria itself. Is it converting fat, carbs, and proteins into, and transferring the acetyl-CoA into the citric acid cycle? And is the citric acid cycle working? Okay. So the most important thing about this is to look at patterns. Are they globally high? Meaning, are they 5th quintile and above, or are they globally low? So what Dr. Lord says is if you have more than 6 markers that are 1st quintile or lower in the first 21 markers, that is pointing to mitochondrial retraction. You're looking at, are the mitochondria breaking down? And the reason why, and this is, look, the readouts haven't caught up with the research yet, because like, well, why aren't there double-tailed things over here in the reds on this left side of these markers? Is because the mitochondrial retraction is a new phenomenon that's been researched. So the reason why the numbers are globally low and you have mitochondria breakdown is because there's not enough mitochondria to even make the marker. There's not even enough to make it. So when you see people with severe fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and so on, you see like 10, 12, 13, 15 of these things, 1st quintile lower. And again, this is why you must look at the creatinine levels first, because if they're all artificially up 1 because of a low creatinine level and you miss it, then you say, well, I guess that's not the mitochondria, when it actually is, because you forgot to shift it down. This is so critical because people miss this all the time. So to rebuild a mitochondria is very different than actually providing the nutrients the mitochondria are burning through very quickly in a high pattern. The high pattern is the engine's running hot. Feed it fuel, feed it oil, feed it all the things it needs to run the mitochondria, all the nutrients, etc. If it's globally low, your engine has melted. You must rebuild the engine, which is a different protocol. Any questions on that? That's just the simplified overview of it.
It makes sense. From a clinical side, what do you see being the biggest source or sources that damage mitochondria?
It goes back to the 10 pillars of health. I find people who have long-term damaged mitochondria, they have a minimum 7 out of 10 of those pillars crumbling.
Okay.
Everything together has just beat down the mitochondria from so many angles. Occasionally you have like someone who's genetically super sensitive to mold, or they're super sensitive to medications because of a genetic issue. And like they just get exposed to that one toxin and just blows the whole system out, you know, but that's kind of a much more rare circumstance. Usually it's just this convergence perfect storm issue.
Okay. If somebody wants to run the ION panel, are they able to just as being a member of the public by themselves run it, or do they have to work through a practitioner to order that test?
I'm sure there are. I mean, there's some more things. There's like a couple more things to the mitochondria thing, but there are ways I'm sure people can get it, you know, from publicly. But I would never work without a clinician's oversight ever. And the reason why is that Dr. Google is a terrible mistress. And you try to look up, much a little on like spell one of these glorified Scrabble word metabolites here. like you will go down, you will into these mama bloggers or these scientific journals, and you will think you're going to die in the next 5 seconds. Like, it is not psychologically healthy or recommended to run this panel without clinical oversight. It's folly, because you go down the wrong pathway.
Well, it seems very complex. I mean, I agree. You definitely want a practitioner to help interpret it. It seems like you get a lot of information from it. So is there like a rough cost roughly to run this test?
Well, there's people that there's the cost of the test, but then there's the cost of the professional time of the clinician to interpret it. And that's the false metric that most people who are trying to price shop between clinicians. Don't go for the person who has the cheapest test. Go for the person who's going to interpret the test the best, because that's ultimately what you're paying it for. Mm-hmm. And the person who's interpreting it for you should be including in the cost of their test what their professional time is, because that's ultimately what you're paying for, not just the lab fee. So it can range from like $1,000. It can range, the raw cost of the test is less than that, but people should be looking at someone who's interpreting this and spending the actual time and being paid properly for it to do it. Like this test should be $1,000 test.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And how often do you recommend rerunning the test? You said 6 months. Is it good?
At 6 months. You don't run it any sooner than 6 months.
Okay.
Because you need time for these things to shift. Like it says, 1 quintile per 6 months approximately. If I were to pick one test for an annual wellness functional test, it'd be this test. And if you had something super stressful happen to you over the course of the year, sure, chuck in an adrenal. If you got sick while you're traveling abroad, sure, chuck in a proper gut test. But if you were to pick one test as your annual, in air quotes, it would be this, because it checks all the things we mentioned, plus mitochondria, brain inflammation, other oxidative markers. It checks liver pathways, and it has biomarkers as well, like stuff we haven't even gotten to yet. So there's all sorts of stuff that can be checked and cross-referenced for the mitochondria test. And that's why it's such a wonderful global test, as well as I think it's the best annual test I know of. There is an upgraded version, believe it or not, called the Cardio Ion, which adds another 15 or so cardiology markers. And I only run that if people have specific cardiology concerns.
Okay.
But that's kind of the next level up, but it's just kind of an add-on.
Awesome. And the heavy metal testing, are they using blood or urine or a combination?
They're using blood for that, and they're using urine for the liver pathways.
Okay. To
check the pathways. Because to me, a lot of times people focus on, we got to detox because you've got metals. You got to detox because we did this, organophosphate test on you. I was like, okay, yeah, they're there, but it's more important to look at, do you have the liver capacity to push them out? Can you clear the pathways first? Before because if you try to detox, you're a detox expert, you know this better than anyone. You try to push out metals and other funky stuff without clearing the exits first, you're in for a world of hurt. Massive amount of hurt. And so it's more important to me to get the whole system healthy, gut, adrenals, and the mitochondria, the fatty acids, the amino acids, all those things really strong before pushing out, really heavy toxins.
I agree. Well, I want to thank you so much for going through interpretation of the ION panel. I'm sure we literally just touched on some things, as it seems like a very in-depth thing, but I really appreciate you having slides for us to so we have a visual of it.
Yeah. It requires a lot of study. There's a lot of nuance. It's a very complex test. And it's a big deal. Like this is why do not run this on your own. If you're a member of the public, please have clinical oversight.
Awesome. Well, thank you for listening to the Mitochondrial Summit. Make sure to share this interview with your friends and family. And if you have the ION panel run, you will definitely want to have this interview for your library so you can re-listen to it multiple times and look at your own test. And also consider, adding this summit to the library as well by just clicking the order button below. But don't forget to visit Dr. Sam Shay at drsamshay.com. So doctor is DR, Sam, S-A-M, Shay is S-H-A-Y.com. Maximum blessings. This is Dr. Jay Davidson.